We're seeing a massive disconnect right now, one that really defines the state of global stability. On one hand, markets are celebrating these record high valuations. The S&P 500 is still surging, signaling huge optimism about AI, about expected rate cuts from the Fed. Yet, at the same time, the fundamental engine of the U.S. economy, manufacturing, is signaling acute redness. The Purchasing Managers Index just dropped to 51.8. This profound divergence, it reveals a structural fragility hidden just beneath this superficial layer of excitement. This is Neural Pulse. Let's analyze. Our mission today is to really analyze the rapid paradigm shift that's underway, a global return to force. We seem to be moving from what felt like managed conflict to something far more dangerous, survival-based coercion. And we're seeing this most clearly in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and this acceleration of a forced diplomatic solution.
The military reality on the ground there is just devastating. This is the war's fourth winter. Russia is continuing a very costly but also a highly persistent war of attrition. Our intelligence suggests they are incrementally gaining territory, something like 176 square miles per month. And that comes with massive casualties. We estimate well over 380,000 Russian dead and wounded to date. That's the brutal reality framing all of these diplomatic efforts.
Right, and that grinding reality is precisely what's driving this diplomatic acceleration we're seeing. Specifically, the U.S.-backed 20-point peace plan.
Yeah.
It's being framed as a necessary compromise under extreme pressure. So what are the key trade-offs that are starting to emerge in these proposals?
The central trade-offs are significant, yes. Ukraine appears ready to shelve the goal of formal NATO membership, at least for the time being. In exchange, they would get very strong defensive commitments from the West. They're being called Article 5-like security guarantees.
Okay, just for clarity for our listeners, what does Article 5-like really mean in this context?
It means the U.S. and Europe would commit to defending Ukraine, supplying weapons, responding to an attack, but without formally bringing Ukraine under the NATO treaty's actual collective defense clause. Crucially, the plan also suggests Ukraine may need to accept free economic zones or demilitarized zones in the east.
Which effectively means setting aside immediate territorial claims for the sake of national survival. A massive concession.
A huge concession. It's about survival and reconstruction now.
But this diplomatic movement, it creates an immediate paradox, doesn't it? Because Russia hasn't paused its military coercion while this peace plan is being discussed.
Absolutely not. While high-level talks are proceeding, Russia continues to degrade Ukraine's ability to even survive the winter. For instance, on December 24th, Russia launched massive strikes. They were specifically targeting energy infrastructure. They left over 500,000 people in the Kharkiv region without heat and power right around Christmas, and they outright rejected President Zelensky's holiday truce offer. The goal is clearly to weaken Ukraine's negotiating hand through, physical destruction.
And if we look for the quiet signal here, the one underpinning the U.S. strategic shift, it's not just about the peace plan itself. We're tracking this U.S. reluctance to fully support Ukraine's proposal for joint management of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Instead, the U.S. is favoring a consortium proposal that might actually involve Russia. What does that policy preference tell you?
It suggests the U.S. focus has moved. It's now strictly on conflict management and termination. It's about ensuring stability in the energy sector, even if that means giving Russia future leverage. They are prioritizing de-escalation over an outcome that would fully lock Russia out of future energy arrangements in Europe.
And that focus on military coercion over pure diplomacy. It doesn't stop in Eastern Europe. This paradigm shift is global. If we pivot immediately to the Western Hemisphere, we're tracking a simultaneous deployment of force in the Caribbean that is highly significant. We are seeing a U.S. military buildup there, publicly framed as counter-narcotics, but it's the largest since the 1989 Panama invasion.
The assets deployed confirm this is far from a simple law enforcement operation. Far from it. The deployment includes the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, the amphibious assault ship USS Iwo Jima, and you've also got specialized platforms like the CV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft and F-35 stealth fighters. The key incident that really flags the intent here is the seizure of the tanker, the Skipper, in international waters, just off the Venezuelan coast.
That seizure is a major escalation. So why now? What does the U.S. gain by using this aggressive sort of hybrid naval blockade tactic instead of just traditional sanctions enforcement?
The intention is clear. This operation, known informally as the Golden Fleet, is a sophisticated military coercion tool aimed squarely at regime change. By seizing a tanker in international waters, the U.S. is aggressively extending its jurisdiction onto the high seas under the guise of anti-sanction enforcement. This is a dangerous expansion of naval blockade tactics. It creates a highly volatile zone and pushes Venezuela into an untenable position, one that's susceptible to accidental military contact.
And these fracture points in the global system, they're not just military, they are becoming profoundly ideological, which leads us directly to a fracturing within Western alliances over core values, specifically the very definition of freedom. We saw this just erupt with the so-called visa war between the U.S. and the EU.
The precise action taken by the U.S. is, well, it's unprecedented against such a close ally. The U.S. banned 5 EU officials, including the former Commissioner Thierry Breton, and several key digital activists from even entering the country.
And the reason this is happening, it's because these are the very individuals involved in designing and implementing the EU's Digital Services Act, the DSA. The DSA is all about enforcing responsible speech, public safety online, things like hate speech and misinformation. But the U.S., specifically the previous administration and some powerful conservative tech leaders, they label this effort the censorship industrial complex. This isn't a policy spat, it's an ideological war.
And what's fascinating here is the implication of using a sanction-like measure against a major ally's former high official. The conflict is over the definition of digital freedom. You have the U.S. favoring unrestricted speech and corporate liberty, while the EU favors responsible speech and public safety. It suggests that the perceived interests of powerful U.S. tech executives are now directly influencing core elements of U.S. foreign policy, even against traditional partners.
That digital decoupling brings us directly to the new and frankly chilling phase of hybrid warfare. We are seeing a definitive shift in cyber conflict, from quiet espionage to outright physical sabotage and infrastructure destruction.
Yes, we have confirmation of a major state-backed compromise right here in the U.S. The Chinese state-backed group known as Salt Typhoon successfully infiltrated the U.S. Treasury network between September and November of 2024. They gained access via a vulnerability in a third-party software vendor, a company called Beyond Trust. And this really highlights the weakest link problem. It wasn't the Treasury itself that was hit, but a key component in their critical infrastructure supply chain.
That supply chain vulnerability is frightening enough, but the strategic game changer is this evolution into physical destruction. We've seen findings from Danish military intelligence about a GRU-linked group, a Russian group, that successfully attacked Danish water utilities in regions like Koja. Was this just simple data theft, or was it purely disruptive?
No, this was not theft, and that's why this case is so critical for us to understand. The hackers demonstrated the intent and the capability to conduct physical destruction. They hijacked the pump controls within the facility. This deliberate manipulation caused pipes to rupture, resulting in measurable physical damage to vital civilian infrastructure.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it confirms that hybrid warfare has entered a new and much more dangerous phase. Adversaries are demonstrating the clear intent and the capability to conduct peacetime sabotage on NATO lifeblood systems, water, power, communication, and with measurable physical results. The distinction between peacetime and conflict is dissolving entirely.
Speaking of dissolving distinctions, we need to connect these escalating military and digital risks back to the strange anomalies we're seeing in the financial and consumer markets. Let's unpack this great divergence between the stock markets and reality.
Okay, let's look at the numbers. On one hand, you have this immense financial optimism, and it's largely driven by the AI narrative.
The hard figures confirm the split. The S&P 500 continues its upward trajectory. It's hovering at record highs, fueled by that AI investment and the anticipation of Fed rate cuts. But then you look at the real data. The U.S. manufacturing PMI has declined to 51.8. That's a 5-month low.
And for our listeners, we should be clear, a PMI reading below 50 signals contraction, so 51.8 is technically still expansion. But what's the insight when it drops to that level?
The insight is acute caution. While it is above 50, the rate of decline is the key. The weakness in new orders and inventory adjustments, it's moving rapidly away from the mid to high 50s. It signals the economy is putting serious pressure on that contraction threshold. And further supporting this weakness narrative, WTI crude oil prices are surprisingly low, sitting at just $58.50 a barrel.
That crude oil price is a paradox. With a major naval buildup in the Caribbean, ongoing war in Ukraine, just general geopolitical chaos, why isn't the price of oil much, much higher?
Precisely. Geopolitical fears should be keeping oil high. The fact that WTI crude is this low suggests that fundamental physical global demand weakness is overriding that geopolitical risk premium. It signals a deeper global economic malaise that the equity markets are just choosing to ignore.
And the only asset that is truly rallying strongly is gold. That rally confirms that powerful institutional investors are hedging against deep systemic geopolitical risk, even while the general equity markets ignore it. So the market is operating in a classic bad news is good news mode, treating every negative economic signal like that weak PMI as just confirmation that monetary easing is impending. Do you agree that this divergence is inherently unsustainable when that AI bubble eventually adjusts?
Yes, because that divergence is built on expectation, not on fundamental strength. And we see the anxiety of the ultra-wealthy confirmed not just in gold purchases, but in consumer behavior, particularly in China.
Exactly. Let's use the Chinese consumer market as a proxy for elite sentiment. Overall luxury spending in China saw a steep decline, about 18 to 20% in 2024. That is massive. But the spending pattern itself tells a critical story about wealth defense.
We can split the data very clearly. Traditional, loud luxury brands, the ones owned by massive conglomerates like LVMH, they've seen their Asian revenue drop significantly. They're reporting decreases around 16%. But at the same time, quiet luxury brands, the ones known for their discretion, like Moynet or Brunello Cucinelli, they're seeing massive vertical growth, increasing their sales by 65.2% and 44.1% respectively.
If you look at that 65% surge in brands that are recognizable only to an inner circle, what does that tell us about Chinese elite psychology? We think it means stealth wealth is becoming a mandatory structural societal signal. Wealthy Chinese citizens are actively avoiding ostentatious consumption. And why? It's due to the pressure from the government's common prosperity campaigns and the increased risk of social or official scrutiny if they flaunt their assets.
They're practicing wealth defense, consuming goods recognizable only to that inner circle, effectively signaling status without attracting the attention of Beijing.
The lesson there is clear. If you can't trust the system to protect your wealth, you change how you display it. And this global instability is forcing rapid defensive changes in key regional players. Nowhere is this shift more visible than in Japan under Prime Minister Takaichi.
Japan has reacted very decisively to the shifting risk profile in Asia. They have aggressively accelerated their defense spending goal of 2% of GDP, which was originally targeted for 2027, and they're going to achieve it by March 2026. The 2026 budget is projected to hit a record 9 trillion yen, which is roughly 60 billion US dollars.
And here's where it gets really interesting in terms of strategy. Key investments in that budget include advancing the acquisition of long-range assets like Tomahawk missiles, which are critical for their proposed counterstrike capability, and also the development of the SHIELD drone-based coastal defense system.
This massive increase in military spending creates a kind of political contradiction. Historically, such aggressive fiscal moves are often political liabilities, yet this push is correlating with very high public support. Cabinet approval ratings are sitting robustly in the 60 to 70% range.
Think about that for a second. That high support indicates a shared national sense of acute crisis, particularly regarding China and Taiwan. It's demanding strong leadership over traditional fiscal prudence. The populace recognizes the external threat is now overriding the need for economic caution. Finally, we have to give due weight to the crises that go largely unnoticed because the world's attention is just saturated by Ukraine and the Middle East. I'm talking about the deeply forgotten humanitarian disaster in Sudan.
The ground reality in Sudan is catastrophic, and it continues to deteriorate. The conflict has led to a confirmed famine in areas like El Fasher, with dozens of mass atrocity reports being issued against the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces militia. The Prime Minister's recent peace plan was outright rejected, which suggests prolonged warfare with no diplomatic off-ramp in sight.
This raises an important question. Why is this crisis slipping off the radar when the atrocities are so acute? Unlike other major conflicts, Sudan is rapidly becoming an information black hole, largely due to communication shutdowns and press restrictions. Reports coming out from humanitarian organizations show the RSF is actively burying and incinerating bodies in places like El Fasher, trying to conceal evidence of mass violence.
That tragic lack of international scrutiny, it increases the likelihood of further mass violence exponentially, and it guarantees the nation's descent into a long-term failed state model, destabilizing the entire Horn of Africa region without the world even taking notice.
So what does this all mean for you, the decision maker? We've seen three mega trends converging today. A global order that's prioritizing force and coercion over true diplomacy, ideological fractures that are destabilizing Western alliances, and market behavior that is masking structural economic risk through stealth wealth and AI euphoria. The core challenge for decision-makers remains distinguishing between that superficial stability, the record stock prices, the vague peace plans, and the accelerating fundamental shifts in power and values that are happening just beneath the surface. The strategic question you must consider moving into 2026 is whether the next major global incident will be a conventional military escalation in a volatile hotspot like the Caribbean, or a crippling cyber-physical attack on core civilian infrastructure, like a power grid or a water system, which would fundamentally change the definition of peacetime forever.
Neural Pulse. Clarity in a complex world. See you tomorrow.